Vietnam is currently building some of the absolute cheapest solar infrastructure on the planet. I mean, the physical panels are a total bargain. The wind is obviously free, and their geographical potential is just massive.
It really is.
Right. And yet, global investment banks are basically terrified to pay for them because, if you were asked to fund a $1 billion solar farm in an emerging market, your first question wouldn't actually be about the sun or the tech. It would be about the invisible financial plumbing.
Yeah, the plumbing that determines if the project actually survives.
Exactly.
Because it's kind of the ultimate paradox
Mm.
of the global energy transition right now. We tend to treat climate change like it's purely a physics or engineering problem.
Like, just build a better solar panel and we're saved.
Right. We assume that if we invent a cheaper panel or, a more efficient wind turbine, the market's just going to automatically deploy it.
Mhm.
But the reality is that the actual bottleneck isn't the physical hardware anymore.
Oh, really?
No, the bottleneck is the architecture of global capital itself. The financial pipes that are trying to carry billions of dollars across borders, they're either leaking or they're just entirely too narrow for the sheer volume of money we need to move.
Which is wild to think about. So today we are taking a really granular look at exactly how the future of our world is being paid for. And to do this, we're synthesizing some genuinely fascinating intelligence.
Some really great sources today.
Yeah, we've got a comprehensive briefing paper from the Australia-Vietnam Green Economy Program. That one was developed by Asia Link and the Climate Works Center. And then we're layering that with some highly targeted financial analysis from Mirai Asset Securities, specifically looking at foreign direct investment in the semiconductor space.
And that combination is so critical because, you really can't understand national climate goals without understanding the microeconomic realities of the actual corporations building the factories.
You need the public policy view and the private capital view.
Exactly. You have to have both.
So, the mission for our deep dive today is to unpack this massive, almost contradictory challenge for you. How does a booming emerging market fund a multi-billion-dollar shift to green energy without suffocating the industrial economic growth that its own people rely on? Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, to really comprehend the sheer scale of the energy transition in a place like Vietnam, you first have to sort of dissect the economic explosion that caused this massive power demand in the first place. You can't just separate the climate crisis from the economic miracle.
Right, and the trajectory detailed in that Asia Link briefing is just staggering. I mean, this all traces back to the Doi Moi reforms in the 1980s, right?
Yeah, the Doi Moi reforms, which systematically transitioned Vietnam from this centrally planned agrarian system into a globally integrated, market-oriented manufacturing powerhouse.
And the human impact of that shift is just undeniable. The paper notes that over the past 20 years, their per capita GDP has tripled.
Tripled, yeah.
And in just the last decade, the national poverty rate dropped by an astonishing 11%.
It's incredible.
I mean, they basically transformed rice paddies into some of the most productive industrial parks in all of Southeast Asia.
They did. But, that level of rapid poverty alleviation and wealth creation, it's heavily reliant on trade-oriented development, specifically energy-intensive manufacturing exports.
Ah, right. Making things takes power.
Exactly. When your national strategy is to become a primary manufacturing hub for global supply chains, producing everything from apparel to electronics, you consume an immense amount of baseload power. You are effectively exporting embodied energy.
Which leads right into the immediate squeeze they're facing. Because the consequence of all that factory-driven growth is that energy demand in Vietnam is projected to multiply 4 times by 2050.
4 times.
Let that sink in. A 400% increase in national power demand. And consequently, the government has established 2 overarching mandates that, honestly, seem mathematically opposed. By 2045, they intend to become a high-income country.
Right.
But simultaneously, they've committed to reaching net zero emissions by 2050.
And achieving both of those targets requires a structural economic shift known as decoupling.
Decoupling?
Yeah. Because historically, economic growth and carbon emissions are perfectly correlated. To grow your GDP, a nation burns more coal to run more factories. It's a straight line.
More stuff means more smoke.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So decoupling is the mechanical process of severing that link. A country has to keep the economic growth line trending upward, while literally forcing the aggregate carbon emissions line downward.
Which is incredibly hard.
It's massively difficult.
Yeah.
It requires extreme energy efficiency gains and a really rapid transition away from fossil-fueled power generation.
Decoupling sounds super elegant in theory, but executing it on the ground sounds like a total logistical nightmare. I
Yeah.
was thinking about it like it's akin to trying to completely rebuild a rocket ship's engine while it is currently launching into orbit.
That is a perfect analogy.
Right, like you have to swap out all the parts, but if you stop the engine, the economy stagnates and falls back to Earth.
Yeah, and if you don't swap the parts, you violate your climate commitments and face international trade penalties. You're trapped.
So how on earth do they afford this? Because undertaking that kind of industrial rewiring requires a staggering mobilization of capital.
It really does. Let's look at the actual price tag required to pull this off. So Vietnam has established this conditional target for 2030 to reduce emissions by 43.5%.
Okay.
And to achieve that benchmark, over 70% of the required capital investment has to flow directly into the energy sector alone.
Wow. Wait, the conditional nature of that target, that's the operative word there.
Exactly, conditional. They can only hit that 43.5% reduction if they receive massive international financial support. If they're left to fund it solely with their own domestic resources, that target drops significantly.
Because they just don't have the cash.
Right. I mean, just to reach their interim goal of generating 47% of their power from renewable sources by 2030, the International Energy Agency estimates Vietnam requires approximately $11 billion US
11 billion.
annually.
Annually. Oh my gosh. Picture your own country's infrastructure budgets, and then try to multiply that urgency for a rapidly industrializing nation. That's insane.
Yeah, they basically need clean energy investment to double, pushing it to over 2% of their total GDP every single year.
But see, this is where the raw data gets deeply counterintuitive to me. Because when you price out the physical hardware required for this transition, it's actually incredibly cheap.
It is.
The AsiaLink briefing points out that Vietnam boasts the lowest average investment cost for solar in the entire ASEAN region. It's sitting at roughly $690 per kilowatt of capacity.
Which is a bargain.
A total bargain. And furthermore, their levelized cost of electricity, or LCOE, which, measures the lifetime cost of a power plant divided by its energy output, it is wildly competitive.
Yeah.
For both solar and onshore wind, it comes in at under 5 cents per kilowatt hour.
Yeah, that LCOE is cheaper than the regional average, and crucially, it's actually cheaper than building new coal or gas plants in a lot of contexts. The physical technology has absolutely achieved cost parity.
Okay, so let me challenge the core premise here then. If the physical panels are that cheap and the wind turbines are competitively priced, and obviously the raw resources like the wind and sun cost absolutely nothing.
Right.
Why is this such a struggle? Like, why isn't every major investment bank from Wall Street to London just aggressively pouring capital into Vietnamese solar farms to capture that margin?
Well, that is the structural barrier of emerging market climate finance.
Mm-hmm.
And that barrier is an acronym, WACC.
WACC.
Yeah, the weighted average cost of capital.
Right. So for anyone not currently sitting on an infrastructure trading desk, WACC is essentially the hurdle rate. It's the aggregate cost of all the equity and debt a developer has to secure just to break ground on a project.
Exactly. So when institutional investors evaluate a solar farm in an emerging market, they aren't just pricing the cost of the solar panel.
What else are they pricing?
They're pricing the aggregate risk of the sovereign environment where that panel physically sits.
Oh, I see.
They have to underwrite political risks, regulatory shifts, curtailment risks.
Wait, what's a curtailment risk?
That's the chance that the local grid just can't handle the power surge and actually forces the solar farm to shut off temporarily.
Oh, got it.
But the most punitive factor by far is currency risk.
Currency risk.
Yeah. Think about it. If a foreign investor lends in US dollars, but the solar farm generates its revenue in local Vietnamese dong, what happens if the dong depreciates heavily against the dollar over the 20-year lifespan of that project?
Oh, wow.
Right. The project could be wildly successful in local terms, but mathematically default on its foreign debt.
Just because the exchange rate moved.
Exactly.
So because of all those layered risks, the WACC in Vietnam is more than double the WACC found in industrialized Western economies.
Double.
It's like finding a commercial property that is an absolute steal on the real estate market, right?
Oh.
The price tag on the building is incredibly low. But when you go to the commercial bank to finance the purchase, they quote you a 20% mortgage interest rate because they're uncertain about the zoning laws or the neighborhood's future. The sheer cost of servicing the money makes the cheap building entirely unprofitable to own.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is how in emerging markets, financial risk premiums can completely overshadow the declining costs of green technology. The solar panels are cheap, but the money required to buy them is exorbitantly expensive.
Okay, so if the global money is too expensive to access, who has been financing the existing green infrastructure? Because Vietnam isn't starting from zero. They already have a significant footprint.
Oh yeah, they actually experienced a massive rapid-fire domestic renewables boom.
Really?
Yeah, between 2019 and 2021, the Vietnamese government introduced highly lucrative feed-in tariffs, or FATs.
And a FET is basically a government mandate, right? Guaranteeing a fixed premium price for renewable power fed into the grid.
Spot on, over a set period. And that guaranteed revenue stream brought in 11.3 billion US dollars of capital, which instantly elevated Vietnam to the seventh largest renewables market in the entire world.
That's amazing. Sitting as the seventh largest market globally is a massive achievement. The AsiaLink paper even notes they're currently the only ASEAN nation beating the global average for renewable generation. They're sitting at about 11% of your total mix.
It is impressive. However, there's a catch. 61% of that massive capacity expansion was driven by domestic developers and funded directly by domestic commercial banks.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. And those domestic banks operate under strict capitalization limits. They legally cannot concentrate all their lending into a single sector. So the domestic liquidity well is effectively tapped out.
They hit the ceiling.
Exactly. To scale from their current capacity up to the 2050 net zero targets, they absolutely must unlock foreign direct investment, or FDI.
Okay, which brings us to the corporate buyers, because this is a key question. Why would a foreign, non-energy corporation care about the underlying energy mix of the Vietnamese grid?
Good question.
Like, if I'm operating a global apparel brand or a toy manufacturer, my primary concern is securing cheap, reliable electricity to run my plastic injection molds.
Yeah.
Historically, FDI didn't care if the power came from a wind turbine or a highly polluting coal plant. They just wanted the power.
Right. But that historical indifference is ending. Fast.
Right.
Because global supply chains are being forcibly decarbonized through international policy and corporate ESG mandates.
Right.
Consider the European Union's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, commonly referred to as CBAM.
CBAM is such a fascinating economic weapon. It basically dictates that if a manufacturer tries to import a product into the European market and that product was manufactured using carbon-intensive, dirty energy, the EU will calculate those emissions and slap a tariff on the product right at the border.
Exactly. It forces the imported good to pay the equivalent European carbon price.
Which is brilliant.
It is. That policy instantly transforms dirty manufacturing power from a negligible, externalized cost into a hard mathematical competitive disadvantage on the global market.
So it actually hurts their bottom line now.
Exactly. And that is precisely why you see major corporate moves, like the Lego Group's recent investment. Lego is constructing a $1 billion US greenfield manufacturing facility in Binh Duong province.
$1 billion for toys.
For toys. But they mandated from day one that the factory must be completely carbon neutral. Lego carries a strict corporate mandate to reduce their global emissions by 27% by 2032.
And they simply can't hit that target if their newest, largest factories are plugging into a coal-heavy grid.
Nope. Vietnam's commitment to a 2050 net zero target was actually a primary driver in securing that billion-dollar factory.
That dynamic is playing out across multiple industries, obviously, but it gets incredibly urgent when we pull in the second piece of our source material, the stuff regarding semiconductor manufacturing.
Yes. This is where it gets really high stakes.
Right. Because the Miri Asset Securities Analysis outlines how foreign direct investment in the semiconductor space is entering this massive new growth cycle in Vietnam. We aren't just talking about plastic toys anymore. We're talking about the fabrication of hyper-advanced components using compound semiconductor materials, specifically gallium arsenide, or GAs.
Right. And gallium arsenide is critical for high-frequency, high-power applications. We're talking 5G base stations, radar systems, advanced aerospace components.
So really high-end stuff.
Exactly. But the fabrication process for GA's chips is exponentially more delicate and energy-intensive than standard silicon.
And the mechanics of that fabrication process explain exactly why the local grid matters so much. When you're manufacturing these compound semiconductors, you're utilizing processes like chemical vapor deposition inside highly controlled clean rooms.
Right.
It requires a perfectly stable baseload of power. If the local grid experiences a voltage fluctuation or a power drop lasting just a few milliseconds.
Just millisecond.
Yeah. It causes a thermal shock in the manufacturing equipment. That millisecond drop can literally shatter millions of dollars worth of semiconductor wafers instantly.
It's devastating,
Wow.
which means they cannot rely on a grid powered by intermittent, fluctuating wind and solar unless it is backed up by a massive, stable baseload infrastructure.
It has to be rock solid.
Solid and green. Because furthermore, the global tech giants purchasing these high-end GA's chips, the massive cloud computing providers and smartphone manufacturers, they have made aggressive public climate pledges to their shareholders.
Right.
They are actively auditing their Tier 1 suppliers and stating, we will only source your components if you utilize renewable energy.
So if Vietnam can't provide a grid that is both perfectly stable and verifiably green, they risk losing the next generation of hyper-advanced manufacturing to competing nations.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have global manufacturers, from consumer goods like Lego to critical infrastructure like GA semiconductor fabricators, desperate to consume green power in Vietnam.
The demand is clearly massive.
It's huge. But the international commercial banks are still paralyzed by that high WACC we talked about and the perceived sovereign risks of funding the actual power plants.
So how do we engineer a solution to bridge that specific gap?
Well, the most effective financial instrument being deployed to bridge that gap is known as blended finance.
Blended finance.
Blended finance mechanically structures an investment into different tranches of risk. So, public money capital from bilateral government partners or development finance institutions, known as DFIs, is intentionally positioned to absorb the highest risk. They provide what is called first loss capital.
Okay, so the public money acts as a sort of financial shock absorber. By agreeing to take the first hit if the project defaults, the public institution mathematically lowers the risk profile for everyone else.
You've got it.
And that makes the private institutional investors feel secure enough to lend their capital at a significantly lower interest rate, which finally makes the project viable.
Exactly. It crowds in the private capital.
But looking through the AsiaLink data, there's a really brutal irony in how international finance treats Vietnam right now. Because Vietnam successfully lifted so many people out of poverty and officially graduated to a lower middle-income country status.
Yeah, this is tough.
They actually triggered an automatic penalty in the global development system. They lost eligibility for a lot of the cheapest concessional loans.
It's the middle income trap applied to climate finance.
Right.
Once a sovereign nation graduates beyond low income status, they lose their eligibility to access those highly concessional international grants and zero interest loans.
They are literally being punished by the international financial architecture for being successful at lifting their citizens out of poverty.
It's incredibly frustrating for them.
The briefing outlines the Just Energy Transition Partnership, or JETT. This is a massive $8 billion mobilization plan funded by international donors to accelerate Vietnam's transition.
Right.
Yet, when you look at the underlying structure of that $8 billion, only 4% of it consists of actual grants.
Just 4%.
The remaining 96% is structured as commercial or lightly concessional loans that must be repaid with interest.
And that heavy debt burden places immense pressure on the Vietnamese government to quickly deploy domestic policy levers. They have to engineer market signals strong enough to de-risk these investments organically, without relying purely on international handouts.
Like what?
Well, a prime example is their rollout of direct power purchase agreements, or DPPAs.
Okay, let's break that down. The mechanics of a DPPA completely alter the risk profile for a developer. Because historically, if you built a solar farm in Vietnam, you were legally required to sell 100% of your electricity to the state-owned monopoly, EVN, at prices dictated by the state.
Right.
And then the corporate factories bought their power from EVN. But the DPPA framework bypasses the monopoly.
Exactly. It allows a massive corporate buyer, like that new semiconductor fabrication plant, to sign a direct, long-term contract with the renewable energy developer.
Which is a game changer.
The DPPA fundamentally changes the bankability of the project. When a developer walks into a global bank asking for a loan, they aren't relying on a state monopoly's pricing anymore. They slide a 20-year fixed-price contract signed by a globally rated, multi-billion-dollar tech conglomerate across the desk.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the revenue stream is instantly secured and insulated from local state utility risks.
Exactly. And to compound that momentum, Vietnam is actively establishing a mandatory domestic carbon market, with full operation targeted for 2028.
Which is huge.
Implementing an explicit, unavoidable price on carbon is one of the strongest macroeconomic mechanisms to punish high-emission infrastructure and aggressively accelerate foreign capital into low-carbon alternatives.
But these individual policy mechanisms, the DPPAs, the carbon markets, they're just components. The ultimate goal here is building an entire sustainable finance ecosystem, right? Like creating an overarching financial nervous system for the country.
That's the perfect way to phrase it. And currently, Vietnam's sustainable finance market is heavily nascent. I mean, they successfully issued their first corporate green bond in 2022, but the government itself has yet to issue a sovereign green bond.
Really? No sovereign green bond yet?
Not yet. And if they want to attract the real tidal wave of global capital, I'm talking about the trillions of dollars managed by massive international pension funds and institutional asset managers, they must achieve interoperability.
Interoperability. Which simply means that a risk officer sitting at a pension fund in London or New York needs to look at a Vietnamese green bond and immediately understand its risk profile without having to translate a completely foreign set of accounting rules.
Yes, the financial data has to speak the exact same language globally.
Right.
And achieving that interoperability requires a highly specific taxonomy.
Meaning a classification system.
Right, a rigid classification system that legally defines what projects can be labeled as green. Vietnam currently has a draft taxonomy outlining 83 eligible project types. Furthermore, they need strict alignment with global sustainability disclosure standards, such as the ISSB or IFRS frameworks.
Because institutional investors have strict fiduciary mandates.
Exactly. They must accurately price climate risks and verify environmental claims before they can legally deploy capital.
And this is exactly where bilateral international partners step in to engineer that interoperability. The Asia Link paper heavily features Australia's direct intervention in this space.
Yeah, they highlight Export Finance Australia, or EFA.
Right, which operates as an export credit agency, and their role is deeply catalytic.
It is. Because export credit agencies possess the unique mandate to deploy capital into strategic gaps where purely commercial banks refuse to operate due to, perceived risk or a lack of market precedent.
The mechanics of EFA's involvement are fascinating. They recently orchestrated a $32 million syndicated loan to finance onshore wind farms in the Quang Tri province. And that project is projected to eliminate over 162,000 tons of CO2 emissions annually.
Which is substantial.
Very. And by structuring a syndicated loan, EFA essentially aggregated a group of lenders to pool their capital, right? Spreading the risk across multiple balance sheets, so no single commercial bank had to absorb the entire exposure.
Right, and they're also utilizing this syndicated approach to finance the manufacturing of electric public buses and the rollout of EV charging networks across the country.
But beyond direct lending, the most powerful instrument these agencies deploy is the credit guarantee.
Oh, this is financial engineering at its most effective.
Okay, walk us through it.
So imagine a local Vietnamese infrastructure entity wants to issue a massive green bond to finance a utility-scale solar project. Because the entity operates in an emerging market, global credit rating agencies might assign that bond a BB rating.
Which is basically a death knell.
Exactly. Because major global pension funds are legally bound by their risk committees to only invest in highly rated investment-grade securities.
So trillions of dollars of potential investment are locked out simply because of a localized credit rating.
Precisely. But if a sovereign entity from a partner country like Australia's EFA steps in and provides a partial credit guarantee, the entire equation changes.
Wait, how?
The partner country essentially co-signs the debt. They're stating, if this local project defaults, our sovereign treasury will cover the losses.
Oh, wow.
Right. By wrapping the local bond in a sovereign guarantee, the credit rating of that green bond is instantly upgraded from a risky BBB to a pristine AA+ prime.
That is incredible leverage. The partner country doesn't even have to deploy the raw cash up front. They just utilize their pristine sovereign credit score to shield the transaction.
Exactly.
And that single administrative action unlocks the gates, allowing billions of dollars of highly regulated private pension fund capital to safely flow into Vietnamese green infrastructure.
It is the absolute textbook execution of blended finance. You utilize a surgical application of public risk assumption to unleash a massive wave of private commercial capital.
So what does this all mean? When we distill all of this intelligence down for you, the listener, the narrative around saving the global climate has completely shifted. The transition to green energy is no longer waiting on some scientific breakthrough.
No, we have the technology.
We have it. The solar panels and the wind turbines are cheap, efficient, and they are ready to deploy today. The true hurdle we are facing is fundamentally a financial plumbing problem.
That's really the crux of it.
Saving the climate relies entirely on our ability to creatively structure blended finance mechanisms, draft interoperable taxonomies, and deploy sovereign credit guarantees. It is about building a financial architecture robust enough to power everything from carbon-neutral toy factories to the hypersensitive clean rooms of gallium arsenide semiconductor plants, all while ensuring an emerging nation's economic engine continues to pull its people toward prosperity.
And, I will leave you with this final structural thought to kind of mull over. We typically operate under the assumption that developing nations must slowly adopt and copy the legacy financial systems established by the West.
Right, like they have to play catch-up.
Exactly. But look at the sheer complexity, the velocity, and the stakes under which emerging markets like Vietnam are currently operating. They are pioneering massive blended finance blueprints and completely rebuilding their national energy grids mid-flight while rapidly industrializing.
Yeah.
If they successfully execute this transition, these emerging markets won't just be catching up. They might actually be writing the definitive financial playbook that industrialized Western nations will eventually be forced to adopt to fund their own future climate adaptations.
Wow. The economies we historically viewed as developing might actually become the architects of global climate finance. That is a brilliant thought to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep scrutinizing the systems around you, keep questioning the hidden mechanisms that actually run the world, and we will catch you next time as we unpack another incredible topic.